Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third session of Learning Together. Today, our main speaker is Professor Shreesh Chaudhary. Professor Chaudhary needs no introduction to the group. So, without much ado, I hand over the podium to Professor Chaudhary.
Accomplished people like you, each of whom is an expert in your fields in your own right. And it is in the nature of knowledge that the more you know, the more you are aware how much you do not know. So I am acutely aware of all that I do not know. I could have learned, I could have done, and the little that I might have done seems to have gone somewhere at the back of my head. It is almost 10 years since I retired from active daily teaching. So, what can I do? What can I tell you? Well, it's like I'm going to give you a tour of India in one day, or tour of India in less than that. I'm going to give you a history of India of about 5,000 years in under half an hour. So you can imagine. So what I will do therefore is I will try and create some questions in your mind so that, time permitting, you can seek your own answers. And secondly, you can ask better formed questions. Your questions even now are well formed, but a person initiated into the subject can definitely ask still better questions. So these are the two, very humble objectives with which I am going to seek your permission, request you to indulge me for the next half an hour. And if you have any questions, any comments, and I'm sure there will be many, please, let's do that after about half an hour or so. So here I go. Being slightly autobiographical, I have been raised in an environment where we talk every day about pure language. The Arunji the other day used the term Sadhu Bhasha from Bangla. Okay, in every language, Pranjal Hindi. Hindi itself is not, Hindi itself is hybrid. The term, the word, it is Arabic word. How can you have Pranjal? It's like saying, please pardon me, ladies, I don't treat you as ladies or gentlemen. I treat you as academics. And academics don't have value attitudes. So, it's like saying a chaste prostitute or an honest thief, okay, or an honest burglar. There is nothing like pure or purity in language. I remember I grew up with my father's mother, my grandmother. She happened to be the youngest but one daughter of a highly learned Sanskrit Pandit. She was, as Rajaji said, educated but not literate. And she was well read in traditional Sanskrit scriptures. And she would spend her entire summer making achar, pickles of mango. Because, I'm talking to you from my village in North Bihar, which used to be called Mithila, now divided between India and Nepal. I'm talking to you from the Indian part of Mithila. And we have lots of mangoes, varieties, 173 different kinds of mangoes, some of the best in the world. And my grandmother I grew up with her. My grandmother used to spend her entire summer making achar. But when I came across Hobson Jobson, and I was checking the origin of words, of Portuguese words in Indian languages, and I found achar on the top. I had a shock. What was the native word for achar which we have lost? It's not, not at all likely that India never had a word for achar. I have, with great difficulty, I agree that achar is a Portuguese word of Portuguese origin. But what happened to our own word for achar? And achar had a great role in the colonization of India. All those European sailors, invaders that came to India by boat at a time when it used to take anything between 1 and 3 years to come to India, achar was their only source of supply of vitamin C, which they badly needed on those sun-drenched voyages. So that started me, not only that, there were other questions, there were other reasons. I am an English teacher. I had questions like, how was English taught? How was English examined when the British were here? Who were the first learners? Etc. etc. That's a lot of questions. But coming back to language and change, it's a huge subject by itself. You know, UNESCO recently celebrated or observed. It's not good to say celebrated. Observed the year of the endangered languages. You know, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, UNESCO observed the year of endangered languages. Funds have been created, projects have been created to save those languages who will have no speakers after the present speakers die. That's uh, another problem. We can talk about that someday if you are still interested. But coming to this, change is part of the design of language. Language is a natural phenomenon. Actually, lot of philosophers from Plato to Noam Chomsky, and even bioscientists today agree that it is language that makes Homo sapiens different from all other animals. That we are descendants of monkeys does not have enough data in support. We can talk about that some other day, but let us talk about the design of language. Language is a very complex structure, much more complex than perhaps many of us readily acknowledge. It's a structure, very systematic or almost very systematic, made up of a lot of elements which are unseen but not unrealized. Say, for example, you do not see air, but you know there is air. You speak only when air flows out of your mouth. But air does not flow out of your lungs to make sounds without any manipulation during its journey from lungs to lips. There are 16 points where it can be manipulated and where it is manipulated. And that is why each sound and that is why each individual sounds different from another individual. That is why when you hear hello, you know where your wife or husband is calling and you are very busy, and you know where your friend is calling and you are not so busy. I have been a warden at an college, and I know when students got phones from their parents, they were very busy, and when they got phones from friends, particularly from other hostels, they were not so busy, because we do not need to see the name. The voice itself is a signature. How come? That is because of those 16 parameters. The combination, the permutation is unique to every individual, and slightest change in any of them, you know, can bring a change in language. We do not have enough time. I cannot go into details of structure, but allow me to tell you that what we know as a sound is not one thing. It's a bundle of 16 features. Okay? And sound plus sound makes a syllable. The smallest structural unit of a language is syllable. That is when sounds follow a grammar and come together. Now it is possible in the design of language that you can have, you know, one particle from one language and the other particle from another language. Persian and Arabic together. English and Hindi in Indian words. When we say, "अरे मेरा बेटा तो डॉक्टरी करता है," तो डॉक्टर तो ठीक, doctor is truly a word of Anglo-Saxon origin. But where does E come from? Okay, so it is there in the design of language that you can always interpolate, you can always change. It's unlike a computer, unlike a car. Car or computer have not reached that kind of versatility. You can charge your laptop or mobile phone only with a particular kind of adapter. In human languages, no. A noun can fit the slot for a noun in any language. A vowel can fit slot for a vowel in any language or less than a vowel. You know, a stress, suprasegmentals, consonantal feature. Let us take a simple word like, often we feel, doctors ask us, "How do you feel today, professor?" And many of us in India, in my village, in Bihar, we do not say, "Thank you, doctor, I feel very good." We say, "Thank you, doctor, I feel very good." In Bihar, Bengal, Assam, Orissa, we feel very good. We do not live in Bharat, we live in Bharat. And our vowels are, pronounced with both the lips, not with only lower lip as the British do. So, one reason why an Indian speaking otherwise very good English, I mean, good is not a good word in science. Good is not a good word in languages. Otherwise, speaking English uh, you know, as faithfully to grammar as a British or an American does, yet an Indian sounds different because the same sound is differently pronounced in India. Unlike the British, our vowels are neither too long nor too short. Our consonants are neither, we don't have as many friction consonants as they have. And this is true not just of English in India or Sanskrit abroad, it is true of all languages everywhere. That is because when you take syllable plus syllable, one syllable can come from Persian, another can come from Turkish. One can come from Arabic, the other can come from any Indian language. Look at Tulsidas. A lot of people never tire of saying Tulsidas has been the greatest Hindi poet. Was there anything called Hindi when Tulsidas wrote? And what script did he use? Okay. And when he used words like तीर विभीषण पर चलते वान विभीषण पर चलते हैं सीपर आप भय हैं. सीपर is shield, which is a Turkish word. हैं गरीब निवास तो मैं गरीब गई गरीबी. Garib is an Arabic word, sorry, Persian word. And Garibi is a Varanasi derivation of Garib. So, syllable can come from another language, words can come from another language. It is unlike today's motor car or computer, which can run only with their own. वो कहते हैं ना अपने ही ताले से खुलते हैं, किसी भी चाबी से खुल सकते हैं. The design of God is such, but a language noun will fit into a noun anywhere. We can say मैंने कई डॉक्टरों से दिखाया लेकिन वो डायग्नोसिस नहीं कर पाए. The doctor is of course British or English, but doctoron, it's a modern form of Persian inflection for plural. So coming back to the language, it is there in the design of language that languages change both in time and in space. That is why, almost every cluster of villages, and I have seen marriage negotiations failing, mothers or fathers objecting, everything has been fixed. Dowry bhi तय हो गया, लड़का लड़की एक दूसरे को देख लिए पसंद है, but suddenly the family discovers, "Ore, the girl doesn't speak Sadhu Bangla. She will ruin the language of my family." Forget it. What does she mean? Her inflections are different. her occasional words. She mixes a lot of English nouns into Hindi sentences, like television presenters today or many other. So syllable plus syllable makes word, word plus word makes phrases, phrase plus phrase makes clauses, and clause plus clause makes sentences, sentence plus sentence makes discourse. That is the structure of language. And at each level, there is its own grammar. Clause has its own grammar. Word formation has its own grammar. Sound formation, syllable formation has its own grammar. Discourse has its own grammar. I'll give you an example, not from English. Think of Persian in India. Now, Persian remained the language of power in India at least for 700 years, until 1884, actually 1872, from about 13th century, from about the time of Khusro to about the time of, let's say, Lord Dufferin, a little later maybe. 1885 will be the safe thing to say. Persian remained the language of power. But that doesn't mean Persian in India did not take from Indian languages. A lot of Sanskrit works. There is a, ladies and gentlemen, there's a wonderful work by a historian from Calcutta, somebody called Jatin Chaudhary, who spent a lifetime researching and writing about Indian influence on Persian influence on Sanskrit, and it is well documented in English, absolutely well documented in English. Allow me to quote only one phrase because we don't have time. You might have heard of somebody called Rahim Khane Khana. Now, Rahim Khane Khana was as learned in Sanskrit as in Persian, as good at weaponry, as good at horse riding, and a wonderful administrator. One of the 9 gems of Akbar's court. Okay, Akbar himself had trained Rahim in warfare, but Akbar also sent him to Allahabad for Sanskrit education, Sanskrit learning. And when Salim was evading arrest, it is Rahim who arrested Salim without killing him. Akbar had said, it doesn't matter, finish him, eliminate him. But Rahim made that mistake of not eliminating him. As a result, when Salim came to power, Salim arrested Rahim and booted him out of Agra. Another story. One day it seems Akbar asked Rahim, what is there in astrology? Hindus are always excited that today there will be eclipse and tomorrow there will be this boy born in this, under this star. Can you tell me in some? So Rahim composed a wonderful book in Sanskrit on Hindu astrology, and he called it Kheta Kautukam. Kheta is sky, a Kautukam wonder, wonders of sky. It is entire Indian astrology in 100 verses, 100 shloka. Many scholars say it is not the authentic work. I am not competent to judge that. But it's a wonderful piece of literature. You can see copies in the National Library, Calcutta, in the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, and of course the British Library, London. Okay? I will just give you one phrase from that book. In one point he says, Rahim says, anybody born in the 8th house of Mars is going to be effeminate, is going to be cross-tongued, and is likely to suffer from skin diseases. How does he say that? He said, Jalado khalkako bhavati. Uhgri sukhone, something like that. Now look at this phrase, Jalado khalkako, Jalado khalkake, sorry, Jalado khalkake, Jaladul khalkake, I'm sorry, Jaladul khalkake. Now Jaladul khalk is Persian. But in the end, the suffix a is Sanskrit. Grihe, in the house. Marge, on the way. Deshe, in the country. So a is Sanskrit inflection. But Jalad ul Khalkak is Persian. Jalad is Mars, Khalk is house. in the house of Mars, if somebody is born, then somebody is going to be XYZ. If I had time, I could have given you more. And it is not that only Rahim did so. Even Hindu poets of that time. Uh, there is a wonderful book on a similar kind on the eldest grandson of Aurangzeb, who became the governor of Patna. You know, he was called Ajim and Ajimus That is why Patna is also known as Ajimabad. Or maybe I am getting the details not quite right. But the book is called Farrukh Sir Charit. It is written by a Hindu Pandit. There also, you know, when an ambassador comes to invite that uh, prince to war against Aurangzeb, then the prince tells then the ambassador from Agra tells the prince that if he has any doubts, he should go and talk to his mother. Now, how does the poet render it in Sanskrit? The poet says, Nij madare prich. Nij is Sanskrit, mother is Persian, and madare, a is again Sanskrit. And you find that every day in English words in India, Persian words in India, Portuguese words in India. It is everywhere. That is how pigeons and creoles are born. That it is there. Let me close this section of our conversation. Change is inherent in the design of languages because they are built with so many different blocks, not one, not two, dozens of blocks, that any change anywhere gives you your individual voice, and cumulatively, it also changes language. So language changes even as you change. Now, the question is, it is possible for language not to change if the speakers don't change, if the speakers never come in contact with anybody else, if speakers remain, if speakers live a confined life all their life, only such that, Plato said, if you lived in a cave upside down, and not even looking at the reflections. So, that kind of imaginary situation apart, human beings change. And therefore, languages also change in time and place. Now, what factors change language? And what factors bring those changes? I can give you a very brief overview. There are 4 or 5 things. You can make an endless list. You can make a long list. But to put them together, put them in convenient boxes. One is power, the language of power. Imagine when Persian came to India. When I'll talk about Sanskrit in a moment. Sanskrit in India, Sanskrit in Philippines, Sanskrit in Egypt, Sanskrit in Central Asia, Sanskrit in China, Sanskrit everywhere, from Philippines to Alexandria. That is why even Arabic word for idol is Buddh, because it stood for Buddha. Okay, many other words, not one. If you are interested in Urdu literature and if you read contemporary Urdu writers from both sides of the border, you find lots of Sanskrit words. And not only today, even in the time of great Mughals, there are, like I told you about astrology, there are books on music, books on Ayurveda, translated into books on a lot of things, translations of Mahabharata, Ramayana into Persian, into Arabic, and all of them are super saturated with Sanskrit words, just as quote unquote our languages, quote unquote so-called Indian languages are super saturated with Persian, Turkish, Arabic, and Pashto is Indian. Afghanistan to Burma is one geography. Politics, I do not know. Politically, you may be 6 different countries or 7 different countries, but geographically we are one. South Asia, Jambudweep, Aryavarta. Okay, so this is Indo-Aryan language. Now, whenever the language has been language of power, like Persian was, it invades over a period of time in 700 years, no matter what you do in revenue administration, you cannot do without Persian word. Even the British could not do. Revenue administration, even today, all over India, not just here, also in the south, you know, you have Persian words. You cannot do without them. Okay. Similarly, Portuguese, you have more than 300 words of Portuguese origin in everyday language, in daily use, in nearly all languages of India. I say nearly because India still has many languages which are yet to be codified, like Naga languages, like languages of the Northeast, languages of the Himalayan or Shivalik hills, languages of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. They are yet to be well done. So, in many cases, there are those things where you have borrowed from. Now, which are those Portuguese words? See, common use. I said achar, boyam, biscuit, tolia, sabun, girja, padri, alcatra, alpine, saya, kameez, maize. When I looked at the list in course of some, I wondered if we had anything of our own. We have, of course, anything of our own. We have also contributed. Today's the latest English language dictionary of limited words, not the unlimited words, not big Oxford English dictionary, which goes in 20 volumes, but the precise, concise Oxford English dictionary, which has only 225,000 words, or Advanced Learners Dictionary of English, which has only 80,000 words. Oxford University Press had 28 different titles from the same language. Okay. There are easily, actually, there is an English teacher, there was an English teacher in Guntur who in 1954 compiled a collection of Indian words in the English language. So no language in contact with another language, as far as empirical evidence shows, remains pure. Chastity, as Khushwant Singh very faithfully said, please pardon me, he is none of my hero, but to lighten a rather unduly serious moment, if she is faithful, she is not beautiful. If she is beautiful, she is not faithful. I think that might have been Khushwant Singh's experience in India. But theoretically, yes, a language can stay pure, provided it does not come in contact with anyone, with any other language. It sees no change, either in technology or in culture or in power or in fashion. Subaltern culture. We start deliberately taking words in use by people from the working classes to identify yourself with working classes. So there are, language change is a dynamic factor. You really do not know why some words have survived and some words have not. In all languages of the world, there are many words from even about 40 years ago. When I talk to my grandchildren and tell them कि पहले मेरी दादी जारन पर खाना में मैथिली में जब मैं उनको कहता हूँ हमर बाबी तो जारन पर खेनाई बनबै छलै चूल्हा लग एकटा उचकन रहै छलै लावन रहै छलै ओहि पर डिबिया जरलै तखन ओकर इजोत में खेनाई बनबै छलियै हमर बाबी आधा से बेसी शब्द एहन अबै छै जेकर अनुवाद हमरा करऽ पड़ैया more than 50% words there are such that my grandchildren do not understand, just as my grandmother would not have understood many words. She would not have understood momo, pizza, burger, entire vocabulary of mobile phones, entire vocabulary of internet and 24-hour television, entire vocabulary of electricity. Railway trains had arrived in her time, but technology and then power, Dillishwar hova, Jagdishwar hova. Anyone who rules Delhi is as good as God. His language is God's language. A Sanskrit scholar says, Dillishwar hova, Jagdishwar hova. As even in English says, give unto God what is God's and unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Okay. So if that is the language, Persian is the court language, then you must learn Persian. a wonderful novelist in Bangla. I mean, may not be the greatest. I still vote for Bankim Chandra as the greatest. But Bimal Mitra is also, wonderful. As far as I am concerned, I'm really a fan of Bimal Mitra. I am really a fan of Shankar. So Bimal Mitra's, quartet, Begum Meri Vishwas, Sahab Bibi और गुलाम, कुड़ी दिए किल खरीदी कौड़ियों के मूल, असमी हाजिर हो. So in Begum Meri Vishwas, this talks about the transition of culture from Persian to English. There's a wonderful book, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure all of us who speak Bangla might have seen it in original. Protham Alo. The hero of this novel is Calcutta, a city which was the greatest of its time in the world, both intellectually and economically, financially, the richest in the world. You could not, I mean, if you were not in Calcutta, you were nowhere. It's like that. And even intellectually, think of a city which had Tagore, which had C.V. Raman, which had Bose, which had Sarkar, which had Jagdish Chandra Bose, which had P.C. Ray, which had Subhas Bose, of all people, which had, you name them, which had Vivekananda, you would give anything to be even a sweeper there. Okay, so that book is the hero of this novel. Similarly, Bimal Mitra's book, Begum Meri Biswas, at one point, somebody asks an old grandmother rearing her grandson, why is your grandson studying Persian, not Sanskrit? That is the language of the Mlechas. Mlech was the term used for everyone who came from the West. Ionian se Yavan hua hai. The term was Ionian, so Greeks were the first Ionians, and then anyone coming from Kandahar, Kabul was Yavan. Okay, anyone coming from east and northeast, Mlecha, untouchables. Hindu एक अलग connotation हो गया. We'll get into that some other day, God willing. Or these things are well recorded. You can read them for yourself. So the grandmother tells her neighbor, it is true that he is going to study Mlecha subject. लेकिन खाना तो मिल जाएगा, भूखे तो नहीं मरेगा, ওই দিকে খাবার আছে, खाना तो है वहां पर. Language of power, language of technology. The railway trains, when railway trains came, imagine how many words suddenly went out of use. Okay, when cars came, when ships came, ocean-going ships with steam engines came, so technology, etc., etc. Now, let me come to the final part so that I can leave some time for you to please don't tear me apart. I'm not a very strong person. Okay, I can hardly withstand a lot of attack or a lot of discussion. I've only tried to raise questions. Why do some words survive and others don't? Even now, from very old time, there are words in our everyday use which survive. Say, for example, many words to do with religion. अभी दुर्गा पूजा आ रही है, दुर्गा पूजा में कुछ भी कर लो, हम बलि प्रदान ही कहते हैं. Everywhere else we offer prasadam, this, that, लेकिन जब बलि प्रदान करते हैं दुर्गा जी के आगे, तो वो जो आता है उसको प्रसाद ही कहते हैं, उसको गिफ्ट नहीं कहते हैं, उसको और कुछ भी पैकेज नहीं कहते हैं, उसको स्लॉटर नहीं कहते हैं, उसको स्लॉटर हाउस नहीं कहते हैं, उसको टेम्पल नहीं कहते हैं, उसको दुर्गा घर ही कहते हैं, दुर्गा मंदिर ही कहते हैं. क्यों कहते हैं? हम तो कह भी सकते थे दुर्गा हाउस जा रहे हैं, दुर्गा टेम्पल जा रहे हैं. इस तरह तो रिचुअल्स से जो वर्ड रिलेटेड है, जिनकी टेक्नोलॉजी नहीं चेंज कर गई, अब जिसकी टेक्नोलॉजी चेंज कर गई, that grinding mill is nowhere now. Recently, I had a granddaughter visiting me. I wanted to show it to her how rice was pounded earlier, how flours were created, and I had a huge quarrel with my wife why she had not kept at least one. And she said, well, if nobody uses it, then why should I keep one portion of the house occupied? Is the house a museum? Now, how do you answer your wife or husband? The best thing is you keep quiet. So, you have to go to the museum to see those things. Even otherwise, transport, entire vocabulary with boat transport has disappeared from India, a country crisscrossed by rivers. Even today, the cheapest mode of transport, I don't want to be emotional and get politically involved. It has eliminating water transport has helped only politicians and corrupt engineers, none else. Even today, it is the fastest and the cheapest mode of transport available to mankind, except, of course, if you take aircraft, it is fastest but not cheapest. Road transport costs you 3 rupees per kilometer, according to Transport Ministry. Railway is 1 rupee per kilometer. And river transport, water transport, 10 paise per kilometer. That is what our Transport Ministry says. But where are those words? घाट का मतलब क्या होता है? मांगी का मतलब क्या होता है? जाइन के मतलब, लग्गा के मतलब, करवाड़ के मतलब, पतवार के मतलब, all those wonderful songs of S.D. Burman. क्या होगा उनका? Okay, so let me not get romantic and lament for change. Change is inevitable. Everything in the world, as Shankara says, is anityam, and that is why he says Vajagovindam. These things, Shishira Basanto Punarayata. He say like seasons, these things come and go. So languages also change, and nobody understands it very well. Why Bhojpuri and Mauritian Creole are doing wonderfully well together, but why Bhojpuri is not doing well in Banaras and in Ara Chhapra Saran, except except through its revival in Bhojpuri films? Why Maithili is doing well in Nepal but not in India? Why Bangla is doing a lot better in Bangladesh than in Calcutta? I have had many students from Calcutta and Bengal raised in other parts of India who can neither read Bangla nor can write. Maybe because their parents still speak, so they understand a little bit, but Bangla has now become a supplement to their English, whatever kind. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I have taken more than half an hour or almost half an hour. I'd like to stop here. And if you have any questions, I could give you a survey quickly. So chronologically, it goes like that. If if you if you subscribe to the theory that Aryans came from abroad, then Sanskrit is a foreign language in India because it came with Aryans. If you think no, Aryans were native and there are disputes, 9 out of 10 historians feel that Sanskrit came from outside. But there are about 1 or 2 out of 10 historians who still believe, and they have evidence. There is evidence both ways that Sanskrit is it's a continental Indian language. But then India has heard and spoken Greek. You have Greek words in Indian languages, like Yavan, I said, like Yavanika, curtain, Yavanika path, curtain drops, because the art of theater was brought to India by the army of Alexander the Great. You don't have Sanskrit plays before 4th century BC. Okay? And since then, coming down, Hebrew, Bangla, Maithili, so-called Hindi, Bhojpuri, all of us have Hebrew words. Words like goal, round, is of Hebrew origin. Sheath, cold, is of Hebrew origin. Meat, friend, is of Hebrew origin. Fola, which has different derivations, fora, funsi, fola, swelling, is a Hebrew origin. Sucha, I always thought my grandmother used to insist she would not allow dalda or mustard oil to go into the deity room. It must be sucha ghee. That is only cow milk purified as ghee. But sucha itself is not sucha. Sucha is of Hebrew origin. So Greek, Persian, Hebrew, Persian and Arabic. The moment you talk about anything called tenancy, revenue, law and order, daroga, kanun, sipahi, bawa, Bangla word for father, Maithili word for grandfather. Baba is Turkish. Okay. Takia is Turkish. Toshak is Turkish. Sipahi is Turkish. Banduk is Turkish. Talab is Pashto. Bagan is Portuguese. कहाँ जाओगे आप? So, in that sense, one by one, so Greek and Persian gave way, Greek, Sanskrit, etc. gave way to Persian. Initial Persian invaders wrote to Indians in Sanskrit. The earliest coins, earliest mosques have inscription in Sanskrit. But gradually, as they stayed here in power, as the Persian spread, and as they allowed Hindus also to learn Persian, and as Hindus started copying Quran, and it is to the distinction of a Hindu that the first printed copy of Quran was done by a Hindu, Jagatnandan Sahai of Lucknow. Okay, because Muslims did not believe in printing, even though they had that is the only religion where reading book is the sole act of religion. Okay, followed by Sikhism, Guru Granth Sahib. Okay, but they did not print. Copying Quran is considered an act of worship. So then came Persian. Persian slowly gave way to Portuguese for 200 years only, because Portuguese had a very stupid local policy of conversion, and India can stand everything, but not assault on its religion. So that is why even among Mughal kings, only those kings survived and made a name who collected revenues but did not interfere with local religion. Portuguese made that mistake. The British did not. The British actually did not ban untouchability until after the First World War. P.C. Ray of Calcutta had to live in another hostel because he was not a Brahmin. Sati was banned more than 67 years after the British had absolute power in Bengal. Okay, the British were here for commerce. They knew very well, it was their motto, that we are here not for cross, we are here for commerce. So then came English, and English under 300 years. Actually, English has had only 200 years in India. If you take from 1757, when they got power, then today is about 250 years. In 250 years, no language had penetrated any other country as deep and wide as English has done. And the reason is both technology and power, and of course, fashion and culture. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not saying that pure language is bad or pure language is good. All I'm trying to say, this is language. If you have any given to me, I would have liked to talk about language education, about education in general. But Arunji had a private, Arunji is a very relentless boss. So he said, no, you must speak only on this. Now, if you have any questions and if I have an answer, I'll try to give you, but you are free to raise your questions and comments and anything else. Arunji, thank you very much. And Ashutoshji, so kind of you to help me make this presentation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience. Yeah.
Thank you. Sir, can you please push your screen a little in front of you, because we can, yes, now we can see your face.
Because the light is not there. I don't have too much light.
No, now we can see you well, sir.
I think Pankaj Mani has raised hand.
Yes,
right?
Pankaj ji has raised hand.
So Pankaj, please go ahead. Pankaj, unmute yourself and go ahead. Question, I would love any one of you to raise hands and ask a question, or maybe comment on what he says.
Yeah. Pankaj is trying to speak, but I think there is some problem with your audio. We can't hear you, Pankaj.
Okay, Pankaj will come back to us. Anybody else here? I'm surprised that we don't have a raised hand.
That is, very good for me as far as I'm concerned.
No, sir. No, sir. That is not very good. So, I mean, till somebody raises the hand, I have to make a few observations. That number one, since we still have time, actually sufficient time, so you can still continue with things which you left when you said next time, when time permits. I would love to hear about some of them, some of those things right now. Number one. Number two, which was my first comment I had thought of, sir, when a wise man speaks, you hear. You just hear. Keep on hearing. So in my case, you got exhausted, not the time got exhausted. So I would request, sir, if nobody has a question, please continue what you would have continued otherwise. Should you, then, I mean, were you not afraid of time, sir? Please, my request is.
Okay. In that case, let's talk about Hindi and our quote unquote enthusiasm for Hindi. You know, India is divided into two on this issue: pro Hindi, anti Hindi, Shuddh Hindi, Sarkari Bhasha, Raj Bhasha. Okay, you know, Hindi itself, there was nothing called Hindi until about 12th century or 11th century. Let's say, let's begin with Al-Biruni. When Al-Biruni came to India in the army of following the train of quote unquote train in its original sense, in the train of Muhammad Ghori, Muhammad Sahabuddin Ghori, Al-Biruni was a scholar, and he came to India in the train of Sahabuddin Ghori not to fight, but you know, he had a project. He wanted to study India. So his book, Al-Kitab al-Hind, according to many European historians and Indologists, is considered even today to be the best book about India by a foreigner. I do not know. I am not in a position to agree or disagree, but Al-Biruni had no language here with which he could speak to the locals. Sanskrit. So he painfully learned Sanskrit, and then using Sanskrit, he started getting across. As the Muslim, you know, the followers of Islam came to India, stayed here, they started proliferating here, they married, they created their own habitations and converted local population to Islam. Then their interaction with the local population grew. And with that growth began the sprouting of Hindi. And the best specimens of that kind of language is in the works of Amir Khusro. Now, Amir Khusro was a genius by any standard, by any stretch of imagination. Amir Khusro was as much a patriot as anybody else, and he was a genius. And you know, he could, for example, India did not have tabla and duggi. Amir Khusro cut it into two and made tabla and duggi out of it. So he was into music, he was into folk songs. He also experimented with language. Many of his verses, you know, and they were composed for the street purposes. Khusro lived long, son of a Brahmin widow, fathered by a Muslim general. He knew both many Indian, he knew Awadhi, he knew Braj, and he also knew Sanskrit and Persian. But he does not have compositions in Sanskrit. He has compositions in Persian, and he has compositions in Awadhi, in Braj, which has half a sentence from Persian, the other half from, let us say, Khari Boli, or Braj, as you call it. Okay. Some of those verses like Sakhi Piya ko jo maine dekhu to kaise kaatu andheri ratiyan. Okay. So that entire verse, is a mixture of both Persian and Hindi. Okay. He says, the first line of the verse is, the nights of separation are long like your hair. Daraz chuzulf. तुम्हारे बालों की तरह वो लंबी है, और मिलन के दिन इतनी छोटी है जैसे मेरी उम्र, यू नो, च उम्र कोता, मेरी आयु की तरह छोटी है. I don't have a very good memory. Otherwise, I could recite. If you gave me half a moment, I can recite that wonderful verse to you to show how Hindi came in. So, this is how Hindi progressed. And because Muslims recruited those big generals, they were indeed great generals, no doubt about that. They were good at horsemanship, they were good at field surveying, and more than anything else, they could survive the rigors of the warfare in a rain-fed country. India or Indian history is replete with examples of division, betrayal. Individually, they might have been great generals, but team leaders, one who could carry a lot of people together before Shivaji, after Ashoka, after Samudragupta, at least I am not aware of. Okay, may have been, but my knowledge, in my limited knowledge, that is not the case. So, those generals and their soldiers started talking a language which had like today's English. You took something from English, something from Indian languages, and then, that began the Hindi language in India. That began the Hindi language in India. I'll give you some examples from Khushro. That is why the initial name for Hindi Urdu was Urdu. Urdu meant the market where soldiers were settled. They bought and sold. And the various names of this language, Urdu, Hindi. Hindi was that language which was spoken in this part of this side of the river, this part of the river, this side of the river, Sindh, the Indus. And because Arabic speakers had difficulty pronouncing sir, so they said her. In many languages, ba and ba are allophonic. In the beginning of the word, they can only say pa or only ba. So, for example, pin and bin sound alike in Arabic. Just as in my village, we don't have sh, we say English. We don't say English. Okay? So there were those things. I'm giving you one verse from Farooq's here. Please bear with me. Sorry, not from Farooq. I'm giving you from Khusro. Please kindly indulge me. Okay?
Meanwhile, I would like to read out a comment from Mr. Dipankar Mukhopadhyay.
Please
Yes,
go ahead.
We need a few more hours from him. Today was more like an introduction. So,
actually, I completely agree with me. Ashutosh Chintan Shah has raised some questions.
yeah, and Mr. Pankaj Mani also has typed in a question. I think there is a problem with his audio system.
Please come.
So, Ashutosh, it would be advisable that you read out the questions to sir while he is looking at the couplets from Khusro. So, but actually, Pankaj can unmute himself and raise the question.
No, there's some problem with his audio. Even if he unmutes, he's unable to.
Okay. Then you can read his question and you can read Chintan's question to sir.
Okay. So
let Chintan ask the question himself.
Okay. This is the first question.
I would love to hear you.
Sure, sir. So Mr. Pankaj is the first one who asked a question, and it is, I would like to know the expert views on relativity and evolution of the rules of language grammars in space and time both, or it should be absolute. It's some kind of theory of relativity that he is trying to highlight here. Chinta, we can't hear Pankaj, so I am unable to explain his question. I cannot read his mind, but I just read verbatim. I would repeat that. I would like to know the expert views on relativity and evolution of the rules of language, grammars, in space and time both, or should it be
I'll call you
absolute?
after a few minutes. Sorry, please come again.
Pankaj's question is, I would like to know the expert views on relativity and evolution of the rules of language, grammars in space and time, grammars in space and time both, or should it be
There
absolute?
is some disturbance. Yeah,
Uh,
there is some
Ashutosh,
disturbance in the
please
audio.
let Chintan come in. It will be better if he talks straight away and sir would be able to hear.
Okay.
And
Mr.
understand.
Chintan, you can go ahead. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. I think there is, yeah.
Sure, if you can hear me, thank you very much, sir, for this very enlightening talk. Uh, I had a couple of questions. One is if you can spend a few minutes talking about the broad strokes of history of Indian languages. So we know about Sanskrit, but we know that there was a time when Pali and Prakrit were also very prevalent, and um, then then obviously Hindi was there. Urdu also came in at some point of time. So if you could give some idea of that. And second question was the relationship between the script and the language. So I mean, very often, like I mean, if I'm correct, then Urdu and Arabic and Persian are all written in Nastaliq. And I believe that I've heard that Pali and Prakrit were written in a different, the Brahmi script, but now maybe that's used much less. So if you could throw some light on, what might have occurred, anything interesting would be, which we could.
You see,
Yeah.
the history of writing itself is under 2 years old, 2000 year old. The script was evolved in somewhere between Tunisia and Alexandria. Those traders coming from Europe on the long road to Asia needed to keep accounts, so they began with some kind of a script, and in the beginning earlier years it was written with hammer and chisel. That is why I forgot to tell you the initial word, the word "tho."
There's some problem. Shreesh
Yeah.
has got logged out by some.
By mistake. Acha, okay. Basically, if persons here write on our group, and if they have specific questions, as many as possible, I shall post the questions to sir, because normally he does not look at the group. He's a busy man. And we can have a next session, continuation of this, because as somebody said, even to me, it was just a beginning. And I would have personally loved to hear him more and more and more. So what we can do, I mean, if everybody agrees, number one, they can post the questions on the group. I shall post him and we can have a session by him, number one first, answering the questions and continue with more. Was I audible, Ashutosh?
Yes, very well audible, sir. I have a request. So now that we'll be closing this meeting shortly, I'll request you to kindly speak to Shreesh sir and tell him about whatever you mentioned just now. And by mistake, I don't know, for some reason he got logged out because he's at a remote place and maybe there is some problem with the network as well. So
absolutely. Now,
yeah.
Kanak ma'am had raised a question. Ma'am, would you at least share the question with us?
गुड इवनिंग सर, गुड इवनिंग टू ऑल. क्वेश्चन ही था सर, एक्चुअली वो अमीर खुसरो पर बात थोड़ी सी अटक गई, तो मुझे लगा कि अमीर खुसरो की कुछ पंक्तियां अगर इजाजत हो तो सुनाओ.
वैसे कनक मैम, Shreesh sir has also joined in, so please go ahead. Shreesh sir has joined in again. There was some problem.
Kanak ma'am, please stay. Shreesh sir, please unmute yourself. Professor Saab, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sir,
Yes.
I just proposed to my friends here, at least I heard 6 or 7 questions. So since you had logged out by mistake or maybe Wi-Fi issue, I asked them to write the questions on the group and I would collect the questions I would have sent to you. Number one.
Okay.
Number two, all of us, if not all of us, most of us are agreeing that if the session is continued, and if you have time, if you could take the next session, I mean, all of us would be benefiting by it. So in that session, if you agree to take, number one, you can answer the questions raised here, which we might not be able to take for paucity of time, and then continue with what you had to share with us. Number three, right now, Kanak madam, who teaches Hindi in Nirmala College, which probably is a university by itself, she has something to talk about Khusro, and after she finishes, Dr. Jha would start. I mean, so Professor Jha, please take over after.
No, but
Kanak
wait a
madam
minute.
finishes.
Please wait a minute. Allow me to read those 2 lines from Khusro, which tell you how Hindi Urdu came to be. Just 2 lines, not more. Please pay attention, and then I'll stop. Je hale miska makun tagaful, duraye naina banaye batiyan, kitabe hijra न दार मेजा न ले हुकाहे लगाए छतियां शवान हिजरा दराज चो जुल्फ वरोज वसलत चो उम्र कोता सखी पिया को जो मैं न देखूं तो कैसे काटूं अंधेरी रतियां. In this quatrain, half of it comes from Persian, the other half is local, and that is how they began at that time. Many of us in language studies think Hindi is the best pidgin that over. And when at the turn of the last century it acquired power, it became the language of India's freedom movement, and we know the rest of the history. I am done.
Yeah. Kanak ma'am, please unmute yourself. Kanak ma'am, please unmute yourself. अब बोलिए मैडम.
हाँ, अमीर खुसरो पर ही बात थोड़ी सी उस जगह रुक गई थी, तो मुझे लगा कि मैं, अगर परमिशन हो तो कुछ उनकी पंक्तियां सुनाऊं. अमीर खुसरो ने खड़ी बोली में लिखा, और उनका मुकरी बोलते हैं, मुकरी, पहेलियां और 2 सखुने. मुकरी, पहेलियां, 2 सखुने बहुत प्रसिद्ध है. लोकगीत तो उन्होंने लिखा ही है. तो उनकी मुकरी में ऐसा है, मुकरी यानी मुकर जाना, डिनाई कर जाना, कि मतलब एक सहेली किसी दूसरी सहेली से कुछ कहती है और दूसरी सहेली कहती है कि नहीं वो साजन है, यानी कि आपके लवर है, तो बोलती नहीं लवर नहीं है. तो एक बहुत अच्छा उसमें है कि मेरा मुंह से श्रृंगार करावे, आगे बैठ के मान बढ़ावे, वासो चिक्कन ना कोई दीसा, ए सखी साजन ना सखी सीसा. तो ये है कि एक सखी दूसरे से कहती है कि देखो ना, मुझसे ही मेरा श्रृंगार करवा देता है और सामने बैठता है और मेरा मान बढ़ा देता है. तो एक सखी दूसरे से कहती है, अच्छा वो साजन है जो सामने बैठता है और तुम्हारा मान बढ़ाता है. तो बोलती नहीं साजन नहीं है, ए सखी साजन ना सखी सीसा, वो तो सीसा है, मिरर है, आईना है. तो ये बहुत एक है उनका. और ये 2 सखुने होता है कि मतलब जैसे कि घोड़ा क्यों अड़ा, पान क्यों सड़ा, तो उसका उत्तर है कि फेरा न था. फेरते हैं घोड़ा को, नहीं फेरेंगे तो अड़ जाएगा, और पान को अगर नहीं फेरेंगे तो सड़ जाएगा. उसी तरह से एक है कि राहगीर प्यासा क्यों, गधा उदासा क्यों, तो लोटा न था. तो राहगीर प्यासा इसलिए है क्योंकि लोटा नहीं था तो नहीं पी पाया, और गधा उदास क्यों है, क्योंकि लोटा नहीं था. अगर वो लोटता, बैसाख नंदन बोलते भी हैं गधे को कि जब तक वो लोटेगा नहीं तब तक उसे अच्छा नहीं लगेगा. तो ये उनका ये 2 सखुने हैं. और उनके बारे में एक बड़ा मतलब आशु कवि थे. आशु कवि ने स्पॉन्टेनियस वो लिखते थे कविताएं. तो ये बड़ा मतलब प्रसिद्ध है कि किसी गांव में गए तो पनहारिने थी और वो पानी भर रही थी, तो प्यास उसे उन्हें लगी थी. सब लोग जानते थे कि अमीर खुसरो, पता लगा अमीर खुसरो है, तो कहा कि पानी पिला दे. तो अड़ गई पनिहारिने, वो जो थी पानी भर रही थी, औरतें गांव की. उन्होंने कहा नहीं, पहले कविता सुनाइए. तो कहा कि ठीक है बताइए किस पे सुनाए, तो एक ने कहा कि खीर पे सुनाइए, दूसरे ने कहा कि नहीं चरखा पे सुनाइए, तीसरे ने कहा कि कुत्ता पे सुनाइए। तब उन्होंने ये बनाया कि बड़े जतन से खीर बनाई, चरखा दिया जलाए, है ना, आकर कुत्ता खा गया, तू बैठी ढोल बजाए, ला पानी पिला। तो यही सब कुछ, और बहुत से मतलब कि लोकगीत तो उनके बड़े मार्मिक लोकगीत है कि अम्मा मेरे बाबुल को भेजो री की सावन आया री, ये जो है उनका है। फिर क्या भैया को दिया महला दुमहला, मुंह को दिया परदेस में, ये सब अमीर खुसरो का ही है, लोग जीवन से जुड़कर। और एक तो जब उनके गुरु निजामुद्दीन औलिया की मृत्यु हुई थी तो उन्होंने लिखा था कि गोरी सोवे सेज पर, मुख पर डारे केस, चल खुसरो घर आपने रैन भई चहु देश। तो
Very
ये
nice.
सब था, तो मुझे लगा कि
In fact, we can have one exclusive session by Kanaklata ma'am on.
Yeah, actually,
अभी
Ashutosh, I have already requested her. I think I requested a couple of weeks back. So she said when she is ready, she will come back. We would surely love to have a session. Jha ji, Dr. Jha, Dr. Jha.
थैंक यू।
I have nothing to add right now. Since just I wanted to utilize the time. By the time Professor Chaudhary was searching for Khusro's verses, that let Kanaknata quote some of the verses. And I can add only one very popular folk song which has been portrayed in many of our films. काहे को ब्याहे विदेश, अरे लखिया बाबुल मोरे, काहे उसी में है वो कि भैया को दिए महला दो महला. So it's been an what can I say, accelerating session. It was a learning process for all of us, but as a student of science and having some interest in literature, language, I can say that the education process, there are learned people here, including Professor Chaudhary, who has been teaching for so long, that your education process is not complete unless you know a bit of your history, the geography, the language, religion, all things combined. Everything seems to be interconnected. You cannot know about the evolution of languages, the scripts, unless you know some of your history, some geography. That is what I wanted to add. Just one line. I have many questions for Professor Chaudhary, but I'm not bothered. He must be a tired man, and I know how busy he is. My only request is, if he can spare some more, not necessarily next Sunday, at his own convenience, we can have follow-up sessions on this particular subject. There are subjects where one can go on talking. He can teach us for years on language and literature, but a few more, couple of more sessions at his convenience. I'll be more than happy and thankful to him. And then my turn. My turn is still waiting. I just wanted to share some of the experiences that I have had in my life, and that has been an ongoing process whenever my time comes.
Yeah, okay, sir. Dr. Jha.
Last Sunday I was in a train, so I was not audible.
Dr. Jha, please allow me to, actually you have just said what you wanted to say. Maybe 10 minutes are left. Professor Shreesh Chaudhary, you had understood Chintan Shah's question, and just as you were elaborating, the line got disconnected. Would you finish before we end up the session? About his question about Brahmi and... Yes, sir. You were talking about the...
Yeah, please ask me.
Chintan, are you there? Chintan, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm there.
So please put the question, and what Shirish sir would answer, that would be the end of the session. And we all have already requested him to take not session after any Sunday. We shall request him to take the session next Sunday itself and continue, if he is free. So Chintan, your question, please, again.
Yes, sir. A couple of questions were there. One was about the evolution of scripts, and you had started talking about its evolution around Tunisia. I think that's where you got disconnected. And second was like when you mentioned that Hindi, I was wondering, when did say languages like Pali and Prakrit kind of go maybe out of fashion or less prevalent, and how Urdu also came in over time.
Okay, right. What is your first question once again?
Sir, regarding scripts, like
Okay,
how
right,
did scripts evolve and what happened to
Evolution
the
of script.
right,
particularly what
right.
happened to the
Okay,
Brahmi script?
right. You see, there never has been a time when India used only one language or only one script. Say, for example, someone like Ashoka the Great, you know, his edicts are in one kind of script in Afghanistan and another kind of script in South India. So it is true that Devanagari and many other scripts of modern Indian languages have evolved from Brahmi. But Brahmi was not always the only and the original script. There were others. Okay. Coming to your second question about Pali and Prakrit, it seems, please mark my word, it seems there is no firm evidence, but it seems Sanskrit was never the popular, quote unquote, the people's language in India. It was always the language of educated, the people in power. And actually, in the caste system or class system as well, uh, many people, even when they knew, were not allowed to speak in that language. There are interesting, episodes from Sanskrit plays, like in Mritchikatikam, where a Brahmin is a thief. Something comes in between and says, the 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 queen says, no, this is important. Let's talk about it in Sanskrit. Or women were not allowed. So Pali Prakrit seems to have, in Pali particularly, seems to have been the common language of the masses of Buddha's time. And Buddha is on record. Some monk one day asked him, "Oh Lord, a lot of people write your words in many different languages, and therefore there are distortions. Should we not have them in one authorized language?" And then Buddha is on record having said that, "Then, oh my dear monk, you did not understand my spirit. I want everyone to understand religion in the light of their own wisdom." And so that is why, lot of scripts, lot of texts were taken to China in Chinese. Those monks that came to India stayed here. People like Wen Sang and Fa Yan, it is well recorded in the history of Nalanda. He took away more than 100 horse load of scriptures from here to there. And thanks to him, that those scripts survived. Otherwise, Nalanda was burned to ashes. So available evidence suggests that Pali was the popular language and Buddha spoke to people in popular language. But like between modern European languages and Latin and Greek, like modern Indian languages and Sanskrit, it is not the case that Sanskrit words were not in Pali or Prakrit. Okay, just as it is not the case that Greek and Latin words are not there in English or German, let alone French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Belgian. Okay, they are there. So even here, Pali and Prakrit also have words of Sanskrit origin, but different pronunciations, distortions. Tamil, even Tamil has close to 3,000 words of daily use, which is from Sanskrit, no matter what you do. Therefore, the question whether Pali was or was not cannot be answered in a very authoritative voice. Allow me to come to the modern Indian languages, and then it will be clear to you. You see, people write the grammar of languages which they want to be taught uniformly. Okay? A lot of people say Panini gave grammar to Sanskrit. Nothing could be farther from truth. Panini just codified it the way Pandits spoke. This is how learned people spoke. And Panini put them together. Panini's credit is that he compiled the entire Sanskrit grammar in under 4,000 verses. 4,000 or 40,000, 4,000 verses. Okay. And from very beginning of the sound, it is not the time for me to go into those details. Otherwise, I could tell you how Panini's grammar is more modern than any grammar today, and definitely more modern than Buddhist grammar of Vakyapadiyam, etc., etc. Coming straight down to the 19th century, when the British came to India and they had to talk to Indian people, how would they learn these languages? They knew Sanskrit was no longer in use. Prakrit and Pali were no longer in use. Classical Tamil was no longer in use. So they wanted to learn these languages, and there were no dictionaries, no grammars. Therefore, in places like Fort William, these British sat down, and these British encouraged, the company encouraged its employees to learn and write what they call vernacular, because they did not know better. Vernacular is a Latin word which was spoken by slaves that were brought to Rome. So they thought these were the languages of uncivilized people. But the first grammar of Hindi was done by a military doctor called John Ortwig Gilchrist or Gilchrist. And what is that grammar? That grammar is a compilation of all words that go into Hindi Urdu today, and gives you rules for some very basic things like when you can say bolo, when you can say kaho. The first grammar, when he did not call it grammar, he called it a compendium to learning the vocabulary of the sepoys. It has a long 3-line title. You can see that, those titles, etc., on the Google. So, languages evolve, languages change. And for anyone to say, just as the lady spoke now about Khusro, now many things are also attributed to Khusro, but Khusro was a learned person. He, in his frivolous moments, he experimented, but in his serious moments, he also has serious works. You can say Kabir was the first genuine poet of Indian languages, because his verses, any of his verses, take words from different languages. Ye to ghar hai, prem ka khala ka ghar nahi. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question which was original script, which was India's original language, is a non-question. Okay, India was never monolingual. India never wrote only under one script. You can say which script was in power, which language was in power. So while Buddhists, kings, monks ruled until about 9th century AD, Pali, even today, Buddhist monks visiting your house, will bless your house only in Pali. Okay. Now it's up to you to think that Pali is dead or not dead. To me, Sanskrit is not dead even today. Pali is not dead even today. It has few speakers. I think, Ashutoshji, I have taken long enough. I think
Amazing,
I must.
sir.
Yeah.
You must be really tired, sir, and still, despite the tiredness,
No question of
ended
tiredness.
with,
Yeah.
yeah, you ended exactly with the same enthusiasm with which you began, sir.
Thank you.
So hats off. So hats off to you, sir.
Please.
And Ashutosh, we shall end. And I'm at the cost of the boring and repetitive. Let me end the session on number one. I'm going to request sir anyway to take the next session. And friends, please let's occupy the entire week on our group chat, essentially confined to what Professor said today. The questions that you might have but did not ask, it may come to your mind later on. If some people give the answers, well and good. So this entire week we shall confine to what was discussed today. And my last line is, actually this is the session which is the beginning of the kind of sessions we wanted to have. The previous two were just warming up. So, this is the kind of, for want of any better, but let me allow the word intellectual. These are the intellectual interactions or igniting of the minds for which the sessions are designed to be. And I'm so happy that Professor Shreesh sir has started it so pointedly.
Arunji, may I make a request, please?
Sir, sir,
May I make a request?
sir.
In our posts as well as in our submissions and presentations, I think, a wonderful presentation or a submission is the one which uses few adjectives. So let us cut down on adjectives.
Okay. Sorry.
Please go on. Yeah, please
Yes.
go on.
No, sir, actually, I have finished. I get your point. Everybody got the point. We can only say thank you, sir. We can only say thank you.
Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, sir.